I keep a last rites ledger. Every chaplain does. It is not a regulation document, no form number, no army standardization, just a habit that gets passed down the way habits do, one chaplain handing it to the next with no formal instruction, just the understanding that when you have performed the last rites of the dying in enough places, you want a record that is yours. Mine is a black composition notebook, the civilian kind, the pages college ruled. I have been keeping it for 19 years. I write the date, the location, the name, and 3 words describing the circumstance. That is all. There are 4 pages from FOB Dellen, dated the 19th of August. 19 names. I wrote all of them at 0200 hours, in the casualty collection point outside the forward surgical tent, by the light of a headlamp clipped to my collar. I wrote them because that is what I do when casualties are brought in and the surgical team is fighting for the ones still breathing. I go to the collection point, I prepare, and I wait for the word from the surgeon. The word never came. By 1100 hours the next morning, all 19 men on that list were breathing. 14 were already in recovery. 5 were in post-op, stable, expected to make it through. Not one of them needed the page I had prepared. I have stared at that page for 7 years. 19 names that should have been last rites records. 19 men who went home. I know why they went home. But I knew it late. I should have known it at 1400 hours on the 18th, when I was standing in the back of the forward surgical brief and Lieutenant Colonel Greer handed her a triage runner assignment and told her to stay out of the tent. The brief was held in the surgical team supply annex, the only space at FOB Dellen with a flat surface large enough to spread the mass casualty protocol sheets. 14 personnel. Greer at the front, the way he always stood, one hand on the table, the other holding the protocol binder, his reading glasses on because he was 53 and would not admit it to anyone except the table. He was a good surgeon. I had watched him work. I do not say what follows because he was not good at his job. I say it because being good at one thing does not make a man right about everything else. She came in with the replacement rotation. I did not know her name. Her assignment papers had come through the same command transition bottleneck that had been swallowing files for 3 weeks. Her classification supplement was somewhere between 2 field stations and a records processing point that had moved twice. What Greer had in his binder was a single-page field assignment form that listed her specialty as general practice and her most recent posting as a stateside medical training facility. He got to the surgical assignments 12 minutes in. He looked at the form. He looked at her. General practice, he said. She said her specialty listing was an administrative error. That she was a forward surgical team chief. That her full record was in a classification supplement currently in transit. I have a mass casualty protocol to execute, Greer said, and I need trauma surgeons and cutters at that table, not a general practitioner filling a vacant slot on a piece of paper that says she trained stateside. He said it without malice, the flat efficiency of a man who believes he is protecting his patients. You can run triage intake. Keep the flow organized. Keep the runners moving. That's where I need you. He handed her the triage runner assignment sheet and turned back to the protocol binder. She took the paper. She looked at it once. She folded it and set it on the supply shelf behind her, the way you set something down that you do not intend to pick up again, and she walked out. I watched that happen and I said nothing. I was the chaplain. It was not my brief. I thought, Greer knows this element. He has run mass casualty protocols in this theater for 14 months. If he says she runs triage, she runs triage. I thought that clearly, and I went to the casualty collection point and opened my black notebook and wrote the date, and I waited. The engagement started at 1710. The first casualties came in at 1748, 3 armored vehicle crew from a contact on the northern road, blast injuries, 1 critical. Then 4 more at 1822 from a second vehicle. Then a 6-man element from a route breach at 1901, 2 of them non-survivable without immediate surgical intervention, the rest serious. By 1930, the surgical tent had 11 patients and the primary table had been running for 2 hours straight. At 1944, Greer went down. Not enemy fire, a cardiac event, the kind that does not announce itself. He was between interventions, standing at the instrument table, and then he was on the floor. His second and third surgeons were both mid-procedure on the secondary tables. The surgical team's nurse anesthetist got Greer stabilized within 4 minutes, but he was off the primary table for the night and everyone in the tent knew it. I was in the collection point when the runner came out and told me. I stood up and prepared myself for what came next, because what comes next when a mass casualty surgical team loses its primary surgeon mid-engagement, with 9 critical patients and 2 partially completed interventions, is a thing I have prepared for before. She was already inside. I could hear her through the canvas. Not shouting, giving instructions in a flat, clear voice, the kind of voice that does not waste frequency on emotion because emotion costs time. She was calling instrument requests and blood product volumes and patient sequencing the way someone calls a navigation route they have driven before. I stood at the entrance of the tent and I listened and I did not go in because there was nothing in the tent that required a chaplain. For 6 hours and 11 minutes, she ran the primary table alone. I know the number because I stood outside the tent for most of it. I am not a medical man. I could not assist and I could not observe without being in the way, so I stayed at the collection point and I wrote in my black notebook and I listened to her voice through the canvas. The jungle around FOB Dellen is not a quiet theater. There was rain beginning at 2100, the kind of wet season rain that comes in without announcement and makes the canvas roof sound like a sustained drum, and there was generator noise from the secondary power unit, and there were runners moving between the collection point and the tent entrance every few minutes with equipment and blood product. There was a lot of sound. But through all of it, at every interval, I could hear her voice. Flat. Clear. Unhurried. That is what I will carry from that night. Not the sound of the rain or the generator or the runners. Her voice, moving through a surgical sequence in a wet canvas tent in the middle of a jungle engagement, with the same cadence it would have had in a clean operating room in peacetime. As if the rain and the dark and the 9 men on that table were simply the conditions of the problem and the problem was solvable and she was solving it. She did not raise her voice once. When an intervention went long she called the adjustment and moved. When a patient destabilized she called the protocol change and kept going. When a runner came to the tent entrance at 2140 and told her that a 10th casualty had just arrived at the collection point, a blast injury, serious but not critical, she said, without pausing, log him. Hold him stable. I will get to him when the table clears. The runner looked at me. I nodded. He logged the man and held him stable. When the power to the secondary lighting cut for 4 minutes at 2217, I heard her say, from inside the dark tent, in the same flat clear voice, headlamps. Everyone. Keep your hands where they are. They kept their hands where they were. The headlamps came on. She kept going. The 10th casualty was on the table by 0020. She had cleared her 9th at 0011. 9 minutes between critical patients, in the dark, in the rain, after 6 hours of uninterrupted work. I wrote that in my notebook. Not the names. Just the time. 0011, 0020. Because I knew, even then, that the numbers were going to matter later. The last patient cleared the primary table at 0149 hours. I was still outside. I heard the change in the tent, the shift in the sound, the way a room sounds different when the most urgent thing in it has been resolved. Then she came out. She was in surgical gown and gloves, both marked with the work of the night, her hair damp against her neck, her face carrying the particular exhaustion that is not tiredness but the aftermath of sustained concentration. She pulled the gloves off one at a time and looked at the collection point. She saw me. Chaplain, she said. I have 19 names, I said. On the readiness list. She looked at the list in my hand. She said, you won't need that page tonight. She went back inside. I sat down on an equipment case and looked at the 19 names I had written and I thought about Lieutenant Colonel Greer handing her the triage runner sheet 12 hours earlier, and I thought about what I had done when I watched that happen, which was nothing, and I thought about the page in my notebook that would not be needed, and I was quiet for a long time. The Theater Medical Review Board convened 3 weeks later. I was not a member. But the report came to me as part of the chaplain's incident file, because 9 of those 19 names had received spiritual care during the evacuation and my records were part of the documentation. I read the surgical log. 14 interventions over 6 hours and 11 minutes. 9 critical care patients on the primary table, plus the 10th who came in at 2140. 0 fatalities across all 10. The board noted it was the highest consecutive critical care intervention count under direct fire conditions logged in this theater in 4 years. They noted that 3 of the 9 patients had presented with injuries the triage protocol rated as non-survivable without immediate surgical access, meaning that without the primary table being operational in the window it was operational. Those 3 men would have been written off at intake. I read that line 3 times. Non-survivable without immediate surgical access. Those 3 men are alive. One of them has children now, I know because he wrote to me 2 years after Dellen, a short note in the envelope with a photograph, and I keep it in the back of the black notebook where it has no category. Non-survivable. He sent me a photograph of 2 children standing in front of a white fence. The board noted the operating surgeon's call sign, iron seam. They noted that her classification supplement, recovered from the records processing point 11 days after the engagement, listed her specialty as forward surgical team chief. 14 prior critical care interventions across 2 prior deployments. 0 fatalities in all 14. The stateside posting was instructor duty. She had been training the next class of forward surgical chiefs for 8 months before the rotation. Greer was in the report too. His statement was 3 sentences. He said he had acted on the information available to him. He said the information was incomplete. He said he had nothing to add to the surgical log. I have read those 3 sentences many times. I think they are the most honest thing a person can say about a decision that cost nothing in the end only because someone else made sure it cost nothing. I do not say that as condemnation. I have made calls on incomplete information in my own work, in my own tent, and some of them were wrong, and the reason those wrongs did not become permanent is often someone I was not looking at when I made them. That is what Dellen taught me. Not that commanders are wrong. That the person with the most critical capacity in the room is not always the person with the most obvious authority in the room, and the cost of getting that wrong can be final. I added a practice to my last rites ledger after Dellen. On the first line of every new engagement record, before any names, I write the call sign of the senior medical officer present. It takes 3 seconds. It changes nothing about what the record contains. But it means that when I open the ledger to a page from a mass casualty engagement, the first thing I read is the name of the person who stood between that page and the men on it. I have done it for 7 years. Some of the surgeons I have worked with since know about it and some do not, but I do it regardless, because a practice is only worth keeping if you keep it when nobody is asking you to. For the Dellen record, on the first line of those 4 pages, above the 19 names that did not become last rites entries, I wrote 2 words. Iron seam. She earned that line. Every name below it is proof.